Election 2024 is moving along. So far, we have a couple of men who may have disobeyed laws pertaining to U.S. documents. A man who disobeyed the laws of gravity by falling up the stairs to Air Force One. Another damn Kennedy. A man who went to war with Disney World. A brash loudmouth from New Jersey. A radio host. Don't ever vote for a radio host, folks. Ever. I mean, you know how we are. There's lots of others, too. I mean, who ever remembered that Mike Pence was running, honestly? How about Cornel West? Or Kanye West? No relation. But one name that's being withheld by the mainstream media is that of Chase Oliver, a man who's running for president as a libertarian, and we welcome him here today. Chase, welcome to Crazy Radio. Let's start with, tell us who you are.
So my name's Chase Oliver. I'm 37 years old, and I'm running to be the next president of the United States for the Libertarian Party. I'm a former U.S. Senate candidate. If you recall last year's Senate race between Herschel Walker, Raphael Warnock, and myself that went to a runoff, kind of made national news, and now I'm running all over the country to disrupt the two-party system just like I did in Georgia.
Last year, the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, leaving abortion law entirely to the states, which I support. Texas has become difficult to get an abortion, while in New Mexico, you can abort a baby during birth. Where do you stand on abortion access?
Yeah, so I come to this question from the idea of bodily autonomy, and I do believe in the concept of bodily autonomy that, a woman, it is her body that is being put to medical risk to go through a pregnancy. It is their decision on whether to continue with the pregnancy up to the point of viability. So I support the Roe and Casey standards, and I think an issue as big as bodily autonomy is kind of a universal right. So I would actually seek to make that kind of the law of the land, to have that viability standard. So as you said, you're not having, late-term abortions without a serious medical complication requiring that. I honestly think that is where most of America is. And I think that's where we can set a standard and kind of leave that culture war fight in the past. And that's just kind of my position is I'm, as a libertarian, I'm pretty pro-choice on most things.
As a member of the Libertarian Party myself, I feel the voice belongs to the people. In New Mexico, multiple counties, including Otero, as well as cities and towns, including Alamogordo, voted to become recognized as sanctuaries for life, only to be told by Santa Fe that municipalities and counties do not have a right to voice these opinions or set laws for them. What say you?
Well, I would have to look at the individual, legislation that's being put forward by localities. It's complicated. And I do believe that local government is the best government for most nearly every case, so long as inherent liberty is not being violated there. And so I do worry about over-regulation of zoning of businesses, though. I think, honestly, we see same cities, let's use the drug war, for example. That's an area where libertarians are obviously against government intervention. But we see cities and towns like Gulfport, Mississippi, who, even though they have medical cannabis legal in the state, they have legislated that medical cannabis cannot be used or businesses can't be in the middle of town. They have to be to the outskirts of the city where most citizens don't go. And, I think that's actually a violation of property rights. I think if you want to put up a medical cannabis clinic in a state where medical cannabis is legal, the local government shouldn't be preventing you through zoning laws. I would say similarly at the state level, if it's legal, there could be a violation of property rights there. If someone wants to buy property and do something that the state has deemed legal and the local government's trying to prevent you, there could be a violation there too. And ultimately, the most individual government most local government is each and every individual property owner. And so I think if a city, wants to basically ostracize through boycott or through whatever, that's their right to do. But ultimately, it's a property owner and a medical practitioner's right to practice whatever medicine is legal in the state.
The border is a major issue in New Mexico. I can't tell you how many stories I've covered about people falling from the wall to their deaths, being baked alive in the desert, or being baked alive while inside semi-trailers. Illegal migration has long been a problem, once recognized by both Republicans and Democrats alike. But now, in order to protect the lives who wish to come across, or to protect the nation's sovereignty, has been called racism. Even President Biden, when he was a senator, voted for 700 miles of border fortification in order to slow down illegal entry. At the same time, I also recognize we're talking about people. So what can be done to rectify the border crisis and protect everyone involved?
Well, ultimately, I think we need to simplify the process to come into this country through legal means. The reason why we have so many people illegally sidestepping the process is because it's complex, it's expensive, and it's time-consuming. We should return ourselves back to an Ellis Island-style immigration, where if you're not wanted for a crime or needing extradition, or you're not extremely ill, then you're going to carry a communicable disease that could really seriously harm other people as you cross the border. I think you should be allowed to come here and work, and we should be very, very open to having immigration. That also bypasses the need to have an overly complex border wall system or massive surveillance and drone policies at the border, things like this. What we can do is we can encourage people to come here and work, and then we can use the law enforcement time and money and resources on cracking down on traffickers who are bringing people over here illegally to exploit their labor or, God forbid, to sexually abuse them, whether they be women or children, right? And so we want to make sure that we are allowing those who come here to work to be able to do so as easily as possible. So that way we're easing those needs to have people baking alive in the back of semis, because we won't need coyotes to have to bring people across if we just simplify the system to allow peaceful people who just want to come here and work to do that. And that also is in line with the libertarian philosophy of that goods and capital, and that includes labor, should be able to freely move across borders as part of a free market system. Property owners who need labor, they will be wanting it to come to this country. And if there's not a need for those jobs, those people won't come here. They will go back. That's kind of the nature of a free market system. And I understand the argument that many people have about the welfare state, that we need to eliminate the welfare state before we can liberalize our immigration policy. But the truth is that I have to stand by my principles as a libertarian, and I can't change what I believe in terms of free movement just because the government has a welfare state that we need to also combat at the same time. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time and treat people with compassion so that they're not dying in the desert. And I want to say the biggest crime that we see from one of the biggest crimes we see from government in regards to immigration policy is when you see Border Patrol dumping out water that's been left for immigrants who might be wandering through the desert, who are dying of thirst, to allow them to live. When they do that, that's a crime against humanity, and that's really, really terrible because it literally adds to the amount of bodies that we're going to find in the desert, who are people who are just yearning to be free, which is what my forefathers did when they came to this country. They yearned to be free, and they came to this country and found prosperity. We shouldn't pull that ladder up behind ourselves.
We're speaking with Oliver Chase, who's running for president as a member of the Libertarian Party. Chase, marijuana has been legalized in New Mexico. Actually, read that, decriminalized, since state laws cannot overrule federal laws. But counties and municipalities are forbidden from restricting sales. They can restrict alcohol. Would you call that respecting or even hearing the voice of the people?
What I would say actually is that, I would get rid of dry counties. I think if you want to open up a bar in town, you should be allowed to, and it will either be patronized or it won't. It'll either succeed or it won't succeed based on whether the population wants to have an establishment selling alcohol in the city, right? So the way to solve that problem is not to, ask that the state be allowing municipalities to restrict individual property owners in their commerce at the cannabis level, but to actually take the hands away from government. I mean, even local government is still government, and I respect that the individual is the most sovereign person here, and that's their property and that's their business. And so long as they aren't actively harming anybody, they should be allowed to have that business. So I would say get rid of dry counties. It's kind of a holdover from prohibition in many cases. And we saw how bad prohibition of alcohol was, and we still see how bad prohibition of drugs are in this country, how it creates a kind of a police state, and it's not stopping people from doing drugs. There's the famous Onion headline, which is drugs win the war on drugs. And that's continuing to be proven time and time again as we waste money fighting this war on drugs, when what we should be doing is really looking at how we can end the scourge of addiction as a medical issue, not so much as a police and national justice issue. I just think that's the better path to go. And you can look to nations like Portugal, which are like a leading example of that path being far better.
Another local issue is that marijuana is a very water-thirsty crop. And in New Mexico, there is a water shortage, something I don't think that was thought out, but we move forward. Some of my Republican friends and Democrat friends, hell, my whole family thinks I'm insane for this, but I feel that the war on drugs is nothing but a money pit. Over $1 trillion wasted since Nixon. I believe that in a free society, a person should have the right to ingest anything they wish, provided they are aware of the product in question and the person is of age of majority. So that means cigarette, alcohol, all drugs, including heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and for those who do not wish to partake, simply don't. Opinion, please.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct because, and you mentioned, product awareness. I think if we actually ended the war on drugs, you would see far less overdoses from people because they would know the purity of the product that they're taking. They would be able to go test something at, say, a pharmacist. That's what they do in Portugal. If you have, say, heroin and you're worried that it's cut with, say, fentanyl, you can take it to a pharmacist who will then test it for you and let you know exactly what it is that you would be ingesting. And so that kind of product knowledge actually saves lives. And I think if we really want to save lives from addiction, we need to be making more available things like Narcan and doing direct and mutual aid and that into our communities. There's wonderful organizations all over the country that do this. The big one that I always shout out is Drew Cook at Shred the Stigma, Oklahoma. They're an organization out there. Through handing out Narcan, fentanyl testing strips, and other such things, they've prevented over 600 overdoses in a year because of what they've done just as an individual organization. And so if we could focus ourselves on that kind of mutual and direct aid as opposed to fighting a war on drugs that's punitive, throwing people in jail, continuing them through the addiction and criminal justice cycle, I think we would have much better outcomes. And we would have much less reason to be continuing to fund this, as you said, over $1 trillion since Richard Nixon war on drugs. We could focus on giving that money right back to the taxpayer in terms of lowering taxes and balancing our budget, as opposed to fighting a useless war on drugs that just continues. Like I said, if we're fighting a war on drugs, the drugs are winning every time.
What's your thought on for-profit policing and for-profit jailing?
I'm not a huge fan of for-profit prisons. The reason being, I don't like putting a profit motive on criminalization of society. I think we've kind of done that through police and corrections unions in the public sector. And when we've done that, you've seen a mass explosion in the amount of incarceration and criminalization of our society. And so I'm a minarchist. I believe that government does have some legitimate roles in things, and one of those is the adjudication of judicial disputes and enforcement of laws. And that does need to be a publicly funded thing because with that, you don't have a profit motive. In fact, you have a profit motive to decriminalize society and to get less and less people so that you can balance your budget sheet and spend as little as possible so you're having as little impact on the taxpayers you need to, while also treating prisoners and those under the care of the state while they're in prison with actual compassion and human rights. And a lot of times when you're doing that as a profit motive, corners get cut that allow people to be abused. And I would just rather understand that as a minarchist, I believe that's a legitimate use of the state. And so that's one of the few areas that I believe actually do need to be properly funded, including public defenders. I believe that's part of our legal system. We have prosecutors all over the country who have, giant columned offices and huge, huge spaces, and we have public defenders who are cramped into the janitor's closet, essentially, and they're supposed to be representing the equal scales of justice and clearly aren't.
How about prostitution? Is it not a right for two consenting adults to sleep with whomever they wish, and any surrounding parameters are nobody's business but their own?
Yeah, pretty much. I've always found it funny that if you do so in front of a camera and it becomes a movie, all of a sudden you're an actor in an adult film. But if you were to do that in the privacy of your home or a hotel room and there's no camera running, it's all of a sudden a crime. The truth is that your body is your labor. You're allowed to use it as an adult any way you deem fit for compensation, and that two adults are engaging in commerce where there is no force, fraud, coercion, theft, violence. That's a legitimate trade of commerce, and the government should really stay out of their business for the most part, not regulate it or try to outlaw it. And I think when you do that, again, when you do that, you can actually narrow the scope of the law enforcement eyeball on the legitimate traffickers and abusers, people who are bringing people over here against their will to work to do sex work, and certainly children who are being overbrought to be abused. You can put that law enforcement dollar, which is finite, right? There's only so many dollars and police and time that you can put into those things. And when you legalize consenting behavior between adults, you allow for the law enforcement to actually target the non-consenting behavior and behavior that abuses children as well.
Firearms are also another hot button. How do you see the Second Amendment?
Oh, I am an absolute supporter of the Second Amendment, sir. And let me tell you why. First off, I've grown up in the South, and we have a culture of guns down here. We understand and respect that culture. But as somebody who I worked in the restaurant industry for 13 years. I used to work in a bar where I'd be leaving with $200, $300 worth of tips every night in my pocket, and I'd have to walk 2 blocks through the streets of Atlanta to get to my car. And I was very happy and secure knowing that I was armed and able to protect myself in case the worst tried to happen, because I'd had friends who had been mugged and had been robbed, and they didn't have the means to protect themselves, and they suffered serious harm. And so I believe sincerely that every person has a right to self-defense, and I oppose any process that would seek to undermine due process to take guns away from people, like red flag laws, as well as any regulation about what is or isn't an assault weapon. Frankly, I want to have the right to buy whichever gun I want to buy, and I think you should have that right too. And I said this in my debate with Senator Warnock. I'm LGBTQ. Armed gays are harder to bash, and armed people are harder to oppress. And so that's kind of my position on the Second Amendment. It keeps the government ultimately in check from the worst tyrannies that could be possible.
I would agree with you and add to it, I should be allowed to buy any weapon the government can buy. Although I don't know what I would do with a tank, but and I think most Americans probably wouldn't have one, but I think we should be able to have the option to buy, you're right, whatever munitions we want to. I think so long as you're not doing it to harm anybody and you're only having that for your own self-defense, go ahead. Education's another biggie. A couple of years ago, a local school board voted down some of the mandates from Santa Fe, and in retaliation, the state government threw them all out of office. Where is the place for government at any level in education? Well, if I were president today, I would be working to eliminate the Department of Education and return education back to as locally as possible. As far as funding of education, I'm a supporter of choice there, and I think it's a way we transition ourselves to a fully free market education system. So I actually believe that sovereignty should be with the parents, that any funding shouldn't go to a public school system or any county or state. It should go to individual parents of children to decide where to put that funding and what schools to put there, because then you're going to have real competition in the education marketplace. You're going to see great schools for STEM learning or art schools or other specialty schools that are going to show up for those students who want them. And you're also going to have quality alternatives to the public education system as it currently exists that will be showing up to really provide the competition that will create the best outcomes for our students and create the best futures for our kids and grandkids. I'm an uncle to 7 nephews and nieces, and I wish they had the best education opportunities, but I want to make sure that next generation does. What about paying teachers bonuses based on performance? I think that's up to the individual school. Like I said, if you get to a school choice environment where it's the schools themselves being funded and not the public school systems, you would see different compensation models for different schools. You would see some that are performance-based. You would see some other schools that might not use a performance-based metric in terms of how they pay their employees. I think that's up to, again, the individual education provider, and that's up to the consumer. In this case, it would be the parents spending those education dollars and deciding what is the best way to make sure that we have quality teachers in our schools. And I think you could use performance metrics to certainly advertise how well your school is doing. So if I were, say, an owner of a private school, I would certainly want to make sure I have great performance standards, and I would make sure I'm compensating my teachers as such. Sounds like a pretty good idea to me, but it's certainly not something that I think would need to be mandated at any level. In recent years, it's been said that CRT has been creeping into the education dialogue and painted historical figures as villains. This has gone so far as to the destruction of statues and monuments. What's your stance? My stance on that is, again, that's going to create an education marketplace. You can have a school that says, I am the most woke school on one door, and you can have, I'm an anti-woke school right across the street, and those parents will be able to decide where to send their kids and what education they want to get provided to them. That's kind of how this system should work. And so
ultimately, I'm always going to fall on the side of letting the consumer, in this case, the parents, decide that. And I think the free marketplace of ideas, in this case, right, is one that should be actively working with the invisible hand and not the fist of the government.
We're speaking with Chase Oliver. He's running for president as a libertarian. Chase, LGBTQIA plus rights, I think I got them all, have become rather radicalized from my point of view, in that those who speak loudest don't ask for equality and fairness. They're asking for preferential treatment. How can this be resolved?
Again, I think you're going to see a free marketplace. I as somebody as a libertarian, I oppose wars. I oppose actual wars. I oppose drug wars. I oppose wars on immigration, and I oppose culture wars. Like, it's not the president or any government really to determine what one property owner does or does not accept on their property in terms of accommodation, things like this. But I think ultimately you're going to see a more accepting world for LGBTQIA people, and that's just because demographically you're seeing Gen Z rising up, and they're going to want to have more acceptance of that population. And so any government use of force to seek to limit that, I think, is wrong. But I also would oppose using government force to enforce such things. So I'm sympathetic to people who don't understand the issue very well and who have gotten divided into a hyper-partisan corner, polarized because of the issue, because that's happening on really every political issue in this country because of the way our two-party system works. And I would encourage people to live and let live. You can live in peace with your neighbor, even if they look different, love different, worship different, sound different than you. So long as you let them live in peace and they let you live in peace, that's really the way we should go. And that's really where the majority of people are. And as you said, the loudest voices might be sounding different on both sides, the hyperpartisan divide, but the broad majority of people who are not loudly screaming in the streets, that's where they fall. And that's where I think we need to fall as a government, is basically take our hands off the wheel, allow peaceful people to exist. And, if you're not harming anybody, stay out of it. If it's not your business, it's not your business.
During a recent beer campaign, the backlash cost the beer company billions of dollars. Those who boycotted were called bigots and transphobic. But are they not also allowed to take a stand? Isn't the hit in sales the free market in action?
Here's what I'll say. I'll say a lot of that response, I think, is quite overblown as to what happened there. What happened was one TikTok video of one person with one can of beer became a major issue that Republicans fundraised off of. They held hearings in Congress about it at a time when we were having, wars all around the world, at a time when we have a $32 trillion debt, when we have an immigration crisis, when we have a justice crisis. We have all kinds of issues that we have problems with this country. But the Republican Party of the United States, a political entity, decided to make that a fundraising thing. Again, perpetuating this culture war. I don't think most people would have seen that ad or known about it otherwise on either side of the cultural divide if it hadn't been made a big issue from the conservative side of the aisle. I don't know how many people I talked to who are like, I had no idea who that person was with the Bud Light can was until I got a fundraising email from my congressman, or I heard about it on Fox News from a congressman, and other people on the right side of the cultural divide freaking out about it. I really don't care who drinks Bud Light. I don't drink Bud Light because I don't like beer. And I think, it's an advertising campaign that works or doesn't work. But ultimately, I don't worry about such things because it's just, that to me is just, that's, not in the realm of, as a presidential candidate. Do I really think about such stuff because that's just going to happen or not happen? I'm more worried about, reducing the size of the state and the impact that it has on the people of the United States. So I just try to stay away from most of those issues because, frankly, my personal opinion is just going to be my personal opinion. As a presidential candidate, I'm working to do things that we can broadly agree upon to get the government out of our lives. And, the last thing we need is a presidential candidate, or certainly not a president, or a member of Congress commenting on a beer commercial or a TikTok video. I think that's a waste of their time, and that's ultimately an insult to their constituents who have them sent to Washington, D.C. to do the real work and not to grandstand. And I would say that happens on both sides of the political aisle. I don't just want to target the right just because we mentioned that particular ad campaign, but it happens on the left all the time too, this performative nonsense government, when we really need to be actually getting together, working on things we can do to more effectively govern and ultimately reduce the amount of government imprint in our lives. I just think everything else is political pro wrestling. And I ultimately try to refuse to engage in that because pro wrestling is it's a choreographed performance art, and I'm not here to perform. I'm here to work. So if that's how the two-party system wants to work, I'm happy to inject a libertarian opinion and show the voter what someone who really cares about getting things done in government looks like.
We're speaking with Chase Oliver on the phone, running for president as a member of the Libertarian Party. Chase, foreign policy in the U.S. is a major issue. We dole out billions of dollars to other nations annually, some of which who hate us. All of the while, we have homeless and starvation in our own streets. This includes our veterans. We have Democrats and Republicans, both, who engage in wars that are actually none of our nation's concern. With the exception of Japan back in World War II and Afghanistan in 2001, but even that one took way longer than it should have. How do you see your administration managing foreign policy?
Well, you mentioned foreign aid, which, while it is billions of dollars, we do have to remember that's kind of a drop in the bucket in the total expenditures of government. But I would seek to reduce all foreign aid. I think it was Ron Paul who said it best, which is like foreign aid is taking the tax money from the poorest people in the richest nation on earth to give money to the richest people in the poorest nations on earth. And so I just don't think that's an effective way to be helping to create markets in the developing world. I encourage things like microlending where individuals, and this would be something I would do from the bully pulpit if I were president, but encourage people to microlend where you send out between $100 and $1,000 to a developing economy, and that gets paid back to you as an interest-free loan. But what you're doing is you're injecting capital into these developing markets that can then become trading partners with the United States. Through business. And the more we trade with other nations, the less we shoot at each other, right? That's the ultimate way to create peace in the world is through market prosperity around the world and market trade. And so I would seek to have a foreign policy that's based on that. I would remove our military footprint from really every continent where it currently exists, except for North America, where we are, because that's kind of the nature and the real need for a military and what I would say is a monarchist government is to protect ourselves through vigorous defense, but not to be putting a military footprint and fighting wars all over the world. I would rather be trading with partners all over the world and encouraging that market activity, so that way we are market dependent on one another and not friendly to each other at the barrel of a gun, because that's not really friendly with each other. That's kind of coercion and exploitation. I would much rather us just love our neighbors as we love ourselves.
Economic issues are hurting us all. Young people are being told that capitalism is inherently evil and racist. They're being told that the richest of the rich are hurting the nation and that wealth should be redistributed. What do you see as a resolution?
Yeah, well, I think the way you do that is, first off, you actually have to talk to young people about the issues that matter to them and offer them free market solutions to the issues they really care about. Because right now, the solutions to the things they care about offered to them, and the people who are willing to communicate those things to them are those who want to offer big state, often socialist solutions, right? So we need to be willing to meet young people where they're at, particularly Gen Z. I tell libertarians all the time, if we're not planting our seeds with Gen Z now, we're going to have no crop to harvest in 10 years when they're the largest voting bloc in this country. And so we need to be talking about those issues that matter to them, particularly things like, the environment and climate change. I believe that that's a real thing we do need to worry about. I don't believe the state is the best solution for that. I think actually reducing regulations around innovation and market activity is what's going to create the solutions that will actually provide us a cleaner and healthier future in terms of our environment. And we need to be talking about those things. We also need to be talking about things like, homesteading and self-reliance and being able to grow your own food. These are kind of values that personally, I just think are just good life values to learn, but ultimately it gets us more in tune with our own environment. But I also think we can talk about things like the student loan crisis. I'm the only libertarian candidate that has a realistic plan to get the government out of the student loan business, which will bring market practices back to higher education, lowering tuition over the long term, but also allowing those who are currently stuck in the student loan debt to have an easier path to get out of it. What I would do is I would take 1.7 of $1.8 trillion of student loans currently are government backed. I would seek legislation that would make those loans interest-free so students can pay down the principal instead of being stuck with interest rates. It provides them a little bit of relief. And you pair that with getting government out of the loan business altogether. So every time one of those principal loans is paid off, there's not another one taking its place. So it gradually gets the government out of the business and also returns those market practices back to college and lowers the cost of tuition. And you pay for that by cutting the Pentagon spending elsewhere and making it revenue neutral. And it's a plan that could be passed by both sides of the aisle if we realistically got it in front of them. But right now, partisan politics prevents that. But if we had a libertarian president putting that forward, I think we could honestly get that passed through legislation. It would be constitutional, it would be revenue neutral, and it would be helping get government out of the education business.
I have one more for you. Chase Oliver, Libertarian presidential candidate. There's an ugly widening gap in America. In 2000, Democrats were screaming that the election was stolen. In 2008, Republicans questioned the validity of the eligibility of Obama. When Trump won in 2016, people took the streets to protest the victory. When Biden won 3 years ago, it was the Republicans who screamed that the election was stolen. The entire time, a fracture in the country widened to a chasm and now a canyon in America. I know you're a bit younger than I am, Chase, but I remember when Reagan was shot. It wasn't the Republican president. It was our president. There weren't people out there screaming, "I hope he dies." When 9/11 happened, it wasn't the liberal Democrat part of the country was attacked. It was our country was attacked. How do you see yourself dealing with a nation so divided? How do you help heal a great people of 332 million to become one once again?
Well, I think ultimately the best way to do that is to respect the fact that no one people are alike and respect our diversity of opinion, right? I think there are political ways to get us out of this hyper-partisanship that we're stuck in, this political morass of polarization that we have right now. The easiest way to do that is to change the way we vote. Right now, when most states have a plurality voting system where you don't even have to get over 50% to win representation. And it often discounts independent and third parties because they get quote-unquote seen as spoilers, right? But if we had things like ranked choice voting or approval voting, even at the most local level, you would see actually a better spectrum of opinion and diversity of opinion on our city councils, on our county commissions, on our state legislatures, and in the Congress. And I think that's really how we're going to have to bridge the divide. We are, the only nation in the, I would say, the quote unquote, what we call the free world, like the world of representative republics, that has just two major party systems. If you look at most of our allies in Europe, there's 4, 5, 6 parties, and that's healthy for them because it forces coalition building. It forces compromise and the ability to get work done with a diversity of opinion without having to be stuck in one hyperpartisan corner or another and having to pick a lesser of two evils. And so we need to fix the way that we actually elect people in order to elect a better coalition to get work done. And I think that best path is ranked choice voting. And I look forward to seeing how well libertarians can do in the states that have it, mainly Maine and Alaska. And I hope that in states like New Mexico and all over the country, we can put ranked choice voting in place so that voters can feel confident in picking their first choice is their preferred choice and not just a spoiler.
Chase Oliver, Libertarian presidential candidate, I give you the last word.
Well, I want to encourage folks to first check out my website. It's votechaseoliver.com. You can see all of the press releases, the media appearances that I've done. You can catch how I'm campaigning all over the country vigorously to earn your vote and to be an alternative to the broken two-party system that a majority of voters know they're dissatisfied with. I want to be a principled option for you on your ballot, and I look forward to earning your vote in the November election. And if you're a libertarian in New Mexico, I hope you can join up and be at our national convention in 2024 in Washington, D.C., so we can select our candidate for president and ultimately have a candidate on all 50 state ballots that can be an alternative to Trump versus Biden 2.0, because we all know that that's not the best outcome.
We've been speaking with Libertarian presidential candidate Chase Oliver. Chase, again, I thank you for your time.